This is NHTV2, North Haven Government Television, a service of North Haven Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the Town of North Haven.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the March 15th Board of Finance meeting. Welcome to all of our regular members, those in the audience. We are going to start with the minutes of the meeting held on February 15th. We have the minutes in our agenda. Any comments or motion? Anyone like to move the minutes?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Old business is none, although I don't know, this may be the right time to say that the members did receive some correspondence via emails, which arrived as we sat tonight. I personally haven't had a chance to read more than one or two, but we did get some correspondence. Item 3. With the unfortunate passing of Mr. Jim Leonis, we do have a vacancy in the office of Vice Chairman. I would like to ask that we have a nomination.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a nomination to nominate Diane Visicchio as Vice Chairman.
I'd like to second that.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Nancy. Any questions, any conversation, any comments?
I'd like to know her qualifications for the job.
I'll rule that out of order and ask if there's any other comments.
As I've stated before, I've always been very impressed with Diane. She comes to every Board of Finance meeting, every workshop, very prepared, asking very insightful questions. She served as the Vice Chair of the Middle School Building Committee for 5 long years, which was a labor of love. And this town really owes her a tremendous debt of gratitude. So I certainly appreciate her willingness to serve, if she was willing, as the Vice Chair of this Board of Finance.
Thank you, Nancy. I'll call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Diane, any words you'd like to pass on before we move on?
Thank you, Nancy, for the kind words.
Sure, of course.
We appreciate it.
Okay. We do have our regular reports, which we will go to next. We have the budget, which follows as item 4. That's obviously the main work of tonight's meeting, as it always is at our March meetings. So without trying to shorten anyone's comment, let's try and get through the regular reports with some speed. So why don't we go to the revenue clerk first? Any questions for Ingrid? Any comments on the revenue side?
Yeah, I have a question. Where it says town miscellaneous receipts, that's like a lump of a lot of items? Like, what types of items? Is that like, what would be in that number? Because I noticed the actuals are...
That was the storm, wasn't it, Mike? It was from the state. We got some extra money from the state, right?
Well, that's, yeah, normally it's land use fees, some miscellaneous fees that happen to the building department that aren't building permit fees. A large chunk of that is $457,000 roughly received from the state that we didn't budget for, which was part of a sales tax incentive that the municipalities received a distribution of. So there's several things in there, a lot of smaller type things that get put in there. But land use fees would be a good example.
Thank you, Mike.
I think it's great to see the tax collections are so strong here. So great work from the town.
We're at 99% for those who were at the audience, sorry, or at home.
Yeah, 99% of the 98.5 of the budget.
Yes, 99% of the budget, correct.
It's also nice to see that the building fees have such a robust cost.
Well, we had about $298,000 in one project that I've been working on that was a big plus on here, so, and I hope that these large amounts can continue with some of these projects we're trying to bring forward here, so. You notice on the interest income, what we've done is we've redefined all of our accounts that were earning .10, and now we're earning 4.3, 4.4, 3.8. So we've increased our interest income also with the amount of money that we have.
Yeah, now on that interest income though, is that something that we account for on a monthly basis? Because this is showing zero for the last month, for the month of February. The number is good, and I hope the number stays strong, but under actual month-to-date revenue, there's nothing there.
Yeah, I think it's just a timing
It
issue.
might be a timing issue, yes.
So,
I'm assuming we record that when we get the bank statement. When do you record that?
When he gets, Michael gets the statements, yes.
Right. But you would think, Mike, obviously that it's a monthly statement, there would be an issue every month.
Well, you know, it's not a leap year, so who knows?
Right. Any other questions on revenue? If not, we'll move on to expenditures. I would comment before we go on, just doing some simple math, given that it's February, that's, if we're all done on a level basis, we'd be through about 66.64% of the budget. We're showing about 70 because most of the members know there's some lumpy items in here. Most notably, just look at the last page, the principal interest on the bonds and the interest on the notes and bonds themselves are lumpy. I think I did a little math which shows that if you smooth that out a little bit, we're probably roughly right on target at about 66% expended year to date. Having said that, if any members have questions, please go ahead.
Any thoughts as to why it's lumpy?
Sure, because the payments are only done once or twice a year.
yeah, a lot of this is front-loaded.
Just the principal and notes, right? I'm sorry, just the interest bonds and notes, whereas the principal bonds and notes are paid.
Well, the principal bonds and notes are already fully expended, and they have been, I think, for, I mean, they're generally pegged to either once or twice a year, Nancy, is my guess, which is why we're fully expended based on the principal and the notes. And the interest itself, though, you might think it's monthly, I don't think it is. Ingrid may know, but I don't think it is. I mean, we're three-quarters of the way expended on that already as well.
What about on page 12, equipment rental?
This was the equipment rental for leaf pickup.
This was for
There
leaf.
was extra runs per resident calls.
And just in general, we always talk about this, office supplies are always,
They're high
They're
this
high.
year, yes.
now that's a contract, right, that we have with
No,
them?
no, no.
We don't have
It's
a
just-
contract with an office supplier?
No, we use whoever gives us the best price.
So
It's
so
either
it's per,
Amazon or WB. They budget and see who's giving them at that time what they need
okay,
at the best price.
all right, so it's each department, when they need it, then they do the search. So it's
Right.
not like we have an overall contract, okay.
Yes.
Ingrid, can you talk to us a little bit about the fire department on page 10? The contractual, I think it's replacement staffing, are those like temporary employees to help offset some of the, where it looks like we're under budget from a full-time perspective, but can you give us some color on that line?
I will have to find out on that line.
All right, Nick,
Yeah.
what happened here was we split the overtime line a year or two ago into the two lines, one overtime, one contractual replacement. So the contractual replacement is simply a fireman takes a holiday, right? So he got backfill a shift, right? So another fireman takes a spot, which could be, extra hours for that particular week, right? So Mike may have other examples, but that's the one I would offer, and that's what that line is.
So we should think of like full-time, personal full-time, and that contractual replacement staffing line as one, because if you put them together, we're we're in a good place from a budget.
Yeah, it's just that, you can't be paying more than, a regular straight time for this line item. But
Understand.
they're not outside, these are
Yep.
town of North Haven employees.
I understand, thanks.
And most importantly, it's that contractual replacement staffing is at time and a half.
Right.
So, whereas obviously the full-time employees are.
Yep. Thank you.
Overtime is a separate issue.
Okay.
On that same page, for fire, the medical supply line is obviously about 30% over already this year, and I'm sure that there are supply chain increases due to inflation that affect every single department. This is no different. But is there a particular reason that this line is so high? Is it Narcan? Is it other supplies?
It's just supplies. I've looked it up many times, and it's
Right.
supplies.
And do we provide any additional supplies to Nelcon, who is also serving this town? Or are they responsible for buying all of their own supplies?
I'll have
for
to
their
ask the
ambulances?
chief, yes.
I can't imagine we're buying supplies from Home Depot.
Yeah,
I would
Imagine that
imagine
either.
not, but,
Right.
sometimes
Yeah.
when the ambulances go to the hospitals, they might, restock a blanket or something like that. So I wasn't quite sure if we were doing the same kind of thing
We
here.
don't subsidize. We don't subsidize.
That's my question. Thank you.
Okay. Mike, any questions on the expenditures?
No, the same question, I think, that just to repeat a question from last month. The winter maintenance supplies,
Page 12? What page?
it's page 13. I don't have a problem with the number because, as Mr. Frieda, I believe, said, we're contracted to purchase so much, and we certainly always want to have adequate supply. But the question being, if these items can be stockpiled for next year, can we reduce that line on the budget that we're working on?
Well, the answer is yes, but we don't know how many more storms we're going to have.
Yeah,
We're going to have.
right.
But by the end of
By
April, we would probably know.
Okay.
Didn't last month,
There was
wasn't there
a-
huge
there was- I
encumbrance
was
here?
going to ask
Wasn't the
that.
question raised that we can
We
back
did.
out of some of that?
We did reduce some open encumbrances for
Yeah.
the salt.
You brought this up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
We did.
So, I mean,
Okay, by April, we'll see what sort of,
no, there was a, Ingrid
There was
can
a
probably
huge-
tell us.
yes.
How much was the encumbrance last month? Do you remember?
It was $47,000 encumbered, but what's strange is that the number year-to-date is also different. So last month, it was listed as $166,000, and this year, year-to-date is $52,000. So year-to-date, as well as encumbered, is substantially different.
I can check on that, but that was some open encumbrances that we had for the salt that we adjusted.
Right. Okay.
But Mike, I think what you're saying is, tell me if I'm wrong, that if we find that at the end of April, we have a high inventory of salt as an
Yeah.
example, that's what you're asking, right? What we think
Is it
about that.
possible?
It is possible, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
In which case, we can come back to that when we're
Yes.
talking about the budget.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. All right, if there's no other questions on the expenditures, why don't we go over to special funds?
So I'm glad to see the police line year-to-date is about $850,000. Because if we need to make any transfers in to supplement our year-end closeout, that's a nice reserve. And we started off with it being zero at the beginning of this year. And that's a nice cushion to have. The Board of Ed capital improvement, you can see it started with a beginning balance of almost 600,000, and it's saying ending fund balance of 179,278, but I don't believe that includes encumbrances.
Yeah, I think you're right, Nancy. When you look at the BOE reports, that's basically all almost fully accounted for. He's got a report in that somewhere in our package.
Yes, exactly, and I
Yeah.
touched on that.
Any other comments, questions on the special funds? If not, let's go to the BOE, please.
I have a couple of very quick points to make on this, actually, 4 of them.
Go right ahead.
So if you wouldn't mind taking one and handing it down. This is the capital improvement report from not quite a year ago, April of 2022. And I believe when we were talking about the MOU last month, there was a question about whether there could be PTA deposits in the capital improvement fund. And as you can see, where I've put a little arrow, there is a GA, which is Green Acres PTA deposit for preschool playground. So the only point of this is just to illustrate that there is evidence of commingling of various sources of funds in this one account that, as we mentioned, is going to be folded into the non-elapsing carryover fund.
Well, I suppose the other variable is that the PTA made a donation towards the playground, and this is how Howard accounted for it, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
understand,
Right.
but the point is, if that is the case, then the PTA should pay their portion to whatever the vendor is, and then the remainder, or whatever the balance is, should come from the capital improvement fund, as opposed to making deposits into this, and then Howard makes an outlay from there. I'm just saying, for the purpose of actually being able to say, this fund includes funds from surplus as well as from other sources, it would be really nice if we simply had a single fund with surpluses from the previous years.
I think you're aware that's what's going to happen with the MOU, right? We already talked about we're going down.
It's not
that
going to
road.
happen if this in fact is the case, because if they can actually make deposits from PTAs and the North Haven Education Foundation and other sources can be deposited into this fund, then it is commingling of different sources.
Right.
Okay, so the second point that I'd like to make is if you actually look at the very long sheets that we get from the finance office regarding the 3 special reserve funds for the Board of Education, and as I mentioned before, if you look at the second one, and you look at the lower right-hand corner, you'll see that, as I mentioned, this is the capital improvement fund. They started with about $600,000 balance, and by the end of the year, with all expenses and the encumbrances, they're going to wind up with about $7,000. And so I have no problem with that whatsoever. I'm just making the point that if they're going to basically empty this particular fund this year, how exactly are we going to pay for the Board of Ed capital requests that are included in the 5-year plan? They're not included in any budget. So in my opinion, the only way that can happen is if the Board of Education in the current fiscal year is expecting a surplus of at least $385,000 that they paid for those capital requests for next year. So just put a pin in that for when we come back to the budget, but I just wanted to point that out. And then in the actual document that was sent to us attached to the memorandum from Howard, if you go to the second page of the budget that includes the notes.
Which document are we looking at?
So this is the packet from Board of Ed
This
that
one.
has the very first page
Okay, I
is
see.
the memorandum from Howard. And I think it's the third page in the packet. If you look down at the bottom of that page, where the notes are, it says waiting for reimbursement from state grant. Now again, the only reason I'm mentioning this is that this is an example of a budgeted line item in the Board of Ed budget in which there has been an expenditure and it will be reimbursed by an outside grant. When I asked Howard if there are any outside grants from the federal or state government or other sources that are used to cover operating expenses, he said no. But here's an example that actually proves that that is the case. And so that money is then freed up, and it can be used in one of 4 ways. It can either be used to pay for additional expenses in that line item. It can be used to pay for expenses in other line items through transfers. It can be used to pay for expenses that have never been budgeted, and it certainly can be set aside towards the surplus at the end of the year.
I took this one as we're over budget by about $80,000, and that this grant was going to get us back to budget.
Mhm. Well, again, I think we have to actually look at, and I have some examples that I can share with you later of exactly those ESSER 3 transfers, in some cases ESSER 2 transfers, that are used to not just supplement the budget, but actually to reimburse particular line items. So I'm happy to share that with you a little bit later. And then lastly, I'd just like to point out in that same budget, again, on the, I guess this is on the 4th page, again, the budget line items that also have the notes. If you look at the column that totals up to $42,019,220, that represents the year-to-date expenditure for the Board of Education. What I'd like to highlight is the very tiny print below that draws a comparison to this exact same point a year ago, in which the 2021-2022 spending for this particular, at this particular point in the year, was in fact $58,394. So in fact, we're spending $16,000 less this year.
You're talking millions.
I'm sorry, $16 million less this year than last year. I have no understanding as to why that is, and the way that they set it up is the current year minus last year, so they're showing a deficit of parentheses, 16 million. So that to me seems like a pretty big difference, and I don't really have an understanding as to why. And that's it for Board of Ed.
I don't think any of us know, I couldn't even read that, honestly, Nancy, it was so small.
It is
You
tiny.
could barely read it.
Yeah, but
Those are the numbers, I could see them.
those are the numbers.
Yeah.
Could we also
No,
make a
May
note about this report? I've said this before, they need to have headers when it goes to,
Oh, absolutely.
and
Yeah,
it needs
I had
to.
to carry them over.
Right, and it needs to be darker, that like, this is not really readable.
Yeah.
yeah.
I'll talk to her.
Well, I
Thank
have an explanation for that.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, go ahead.
That must be included just to compare the first 5 columns, because there are headers on the page before, and it shows Q1, Q2, January, February, and Q3. What those teeny numbers also show, though, is that there's expenditures for Q4, which haven't occurred yet, and that's why that $58 million figure is for the entire year in the small figures. So it's not what the cumulative amount is, the year-to-date expense, as of the date of this report. So,
I think it lists encumbrances,
You know-
and those exist for both.
okay, but I just want you to know that, you see the column,
18 million,
see the column with all the dashes?
Yep.
Yeah, there's 18 million below that.
Yeah.
And that's what was spent in quarter 4 of last year.
Right.
And so that amount over in the far right column below, not far right, well, anyway, that $58 million figure is for all 4 quarters of the year, not this fiscal year-to-date figure of 42 million.
So we're actually about 2 million over.
Again, I don't know why they would list these numbers if the point is to compare where we are now this year with where we were last year.
Well, they should have left off the numbers in the last 3 columns in the small numbers, because I think it's just to compare spending up to this point, which is the first 5 columns in this report. And we can ask Howard to clean it up.
All right, thank you, Nancy, thank you for the help, Mike. Any other comments, questions on the BOE budget? Sorry, monthly report. If not, I'd like a motion on the reports, please.
I move to approve the reports as presented.
I'll second them. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great, thank you very much. All right. We now have the budget. I'm going to make a couple introductory remarks, and then we'll open it up to the members for their own comments. So just for those in the audience and those at home, the way the process works is we get a budget that's, in this case, it's the January budget, was dated January 18th. That budget was $124,612,000. It represented a 7.4% increase over the 2022 numbers. That breaks down to about 12.2% in the town, and the BOE was about 2.87%. We then meet with the various department heads. They take us through the budgets. There are some suggested cuts that occur. We'll go through those in a minute. But the result is the budget that we have in front of us, which is now $121,940,000. It's a 5% increase versus the 7.4 we had in January, and that breaks down to a 2.46% increase in the BOE, again, versus the 287 they gave us, and the town is 7.9, again, that's versus the 12.2% we had back in January. Now, the conversation this evening is primarily about the expenses, but we do have revenues in the document that the members have in front of them, and I guess I would just point out a couple things. First of all, the way I started to look at this is that, you know, we've got various buckets of revenue, but I think all of us here in the room and those at home understand that by far for North Haven, the biggest item is the taxes that we assess against the properties in town. But just for perspective, if you look at the projected revenues that are in this document and you net out the taxes that are here, what you're going to find is that our other sources of revenue are down about $2.1 million versus last year. So last year we had about $19 million in what I call other revenue, and this has about 16.9. The two biggest reasons for that are the ESSER 1 and 3 dollars, which were about $1 million in 22-23, and are zero in the current budget. And the other item is the ARPA money, which was $1,670,000 in the 22-23 budget, and is zero this year. That's, by the way, because the ARPA law, as I understand it, allowed towns to take a general allocation and put it towards their operating expenses, which we did last year. Although I'm not privy to all the numbers, I think Mike could confirm that any ARPA money that we had that remained is now fully accounted for by projects in town, so we don't have that luxury this year. There are some other movements here, and by the way, I would point out that some of the big numbers here have been confirmed by OPM for the members. So our ECS number of $4,182,000 did come from OPM, as did the pilot money, which you're going to find out, by the way, when you do the math, they sort of net out to no increase. The grants for municipal projects also, again, it's the same number, but that was an OPM number that we got. A couple other movements I'll just mention briefly. We heard the discussion on short-term investments, so we are increasing the budget on that item from $150 to $500. Debt service reserve, which was zero last year, is now $450. And again, for the members and those at home, those are premiums we earn on our bond placements that we set aside, and once they accumulate, they're available to be used in the budget like this. We have used them in prior years, so it just wasn't any last year. You'll see there's about 122. Project fund transfers, Nancy, you just kind of mentioned that a second ago, but we are projecting to be down a little bit from 550 to 250, and I would say, in my opinion, those are the major movements on the revenue side.
Yeah, so let me just further illustrate this. So we received an increase in ECS of about $313,000 that goes to the Board of Education. But we received a decrease in the town pilot of about $289,000. So the town took a hit, revenue $289, Board of Ed through the ECS will get $313,000 more.
Thanks, Mike. Just one or two other couple of comments from me, and then again, we'll open it up. But, You know, we always sort of look at the major movers when Mike gives his presentation in the high school in a couple weeks, and then again later in May. You know, he'll talk about the major movers that hit the budget. And just to give an idea, you know, the police department is up over $800,000. Fire's about $5. Pension, Social Security about $750,000. Insurance about $720,000, and payments on our bonds, that's principal interest, is up about $666,000. So that's about $3.5 million, give or take, in just those 5 categories. The police and fire, I don't have my notes, but part of the reason for that is we have added to staff there in the last year or so.
So just for the general public, so Tim just mentioned that the debt service has gone up. And what happens sometimes in government, if you see a new building, like the middle school or the police department, when you see it brand new, that means the payments have just begun. So our debt service has increased this year, and I had to explain this to the rating agencies, because we're paying now more on the middle school and more on the police departments. We're still paying off the fire departments, and I think we've just about retired the debt, believe it or not, on the high school, which opened up in 2005. So additionally, we pave roads every year. The cost of paving roads has gone from $2 million for 10 miles to $2.6 million, a 30% increase from an inflation standpoint. Everything we do, some of the line items that we talked about earlier, were affected by this inflation. So when we look at debt service, we have to pay the debt. We look at health insurance, we have to pay the health insurance. And the way it works in government, not just North Haven, every city and town across the state, when the markets go down from an investment standpoint, the towns and cities have to make up the difference for those who are pensioners. And municipalities in the past have really put the pensioners in a difficult spot by kicking that can down the road. So what that means is that our annual required contributions go up when the markets go down. So these are fixed expenses that sometimes we can't do anything about. And what we will never do, for as long as this administration is here, is kick cans down the road, because it catches up with you. And one municipality had to take out a $120 million pension obligation bond to fund the difference between kicking that pension plan down the road.
I think for as long as I've been on this board, I will give the town credit for one thing. I think we've always financed the annually required contribution that Mike is talking about 100%. Because of other factors, some of which he mentioned, you know, our actual funding levels on the pension plans do fluctuate. But I think we have been consistent over the years in funding that item 100%. Let me just hit one or two other things, and again, we'll go to the members. Members have a decrement list as proposed here. It totals $2,672,000. It is heavy on the capital side. At the bottom, you see some personnel adjustments in the finance office. I'll do the math for you and let you know that those numbers net out to zero anyways. So the rest is listed there in capital above. There's a slight adjustment in the election expense. And then I just want to comment at the bottom on the Board of Ed. There is a number here, a decrement of $250,000. I think all of us, not sure if you were there, Diane, but were here when the Board of Ed gave their workshop. They did have 3 positions which were funded by grants in the past that they wanted to convert to full-time positions. That was in their budget. That was a slightly different presentation than we got from the town side. There was at least 3 positions proposed on the town side that were not in their numbers. They were discussed at our workshops. So they were presented a little bit differently. I think the feeling was that, given that we all know it's a tough budget year, that we didn't think it prudent to have any new hires. So while the Board of Ed has a latitude to manage their system the way they would like, and they could very well decide, by the way, to maintain those 3 positions, the $250 cut does represent the all-in cost of those 3 positions. The only other thing I would say, and Nancy, sort of thinking of you here if you don't mind, I'll try and find an example. I got to pull my budget out, but one thing I'll point out, I'll give you an example. Give me 1 second. Oh, here we go. If the members wouldn't mind going to page 40, just for instance. So Nancy, I know over the years you've paid particular attention to the employment tables. You'll notice at the very bottom of this page, it says substitute librarian 1. You'll notice there's no budget for this year or next year.
Yes.
So we've checked with our town attorney, Mr. D'Onofrio, on the question of the employment tables and who manages the employment tables, if you will. And the answer we got was that, you know, the hiring, firing, promotion, movement of employees is a management matter. We do control the dollars. And, you know, therefore, in theory, a department head could promote someone, but they have to have the dollars in their budget. So in this case here, I don't know the specifics, but I understand that the library may want to create a position for a substitute librarian, which is why you have a 0 item there. But their budget of $682,431 for personnel would not change. So basically what we're doing is we're highlighting the fact that she may want to create this position. She can do that, but she's got to find the dollars within her overall $682,431.
There it looks like a library 2 is being moved up to a library 1. They're going
There are other movements, I think, Mike, I think you're right
Going
there.
from 3 people to 2. That's what appears.
Oh, I think that is a movement
Yes.
within this
Yes.
budget, but I think the substitute
So
librarian.
it's a reclassification.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's, you know.
Well, I mean, listen, we all have senior employees that retire, right? And every company and every municipality has different levels of employees. You could hire someone in a lower level, right?
Yes.
Likewise, you have other people that can get promoted.
Yeah. No, to me, that's completely understandable.
So I'd just like to draw a very important distinction between promoting someone and creating a new position. Those are two very different things. Where you're adding a new position and ultimately adding to the total head count, if you will, of your department, that is very different from simply moving someone from librarian 1 to librarian 2 to librarian 3. So I think we went through this with the creation of positions in several different departments that has been questioned over time. And I think just in fairness to the people that have to vote on the budget, that whatever the budget is when it's presented at the referendum has to be frozen in time. So I agree with you that in theory, if it can be done without ultimately costing the taxpayers more money, that's one issue. But I do believe that creating new positions is something that really should only be done, to the extent possible, at a budget workshop and presented as part of the overall budget.
You know, Nancy, I'd have to ask Jeff what he thought about that. I mean, he did send me an email and
Well, his mentor actually created a legal brief on this very issue, and I think was very clear about it. So, and in this particular department, I think librarian 2 is also going from 0 to 1. So it's hard to say whether that means that that's a created position. I'm sure at some point in the distant past there was a librarian 2, but in this particular year, they're going from 0 to 1. And again, that could be a promotion. But it's hard to know. It seemed to me that there was another position that was being created.
Yeah. So the question that you have right now that you're trying to explain is the employment table or the salary listings for employees, is it an explanatory supplement or is it a more or less a stipulation or mandatory list of positions that must be adhered to by department heads? And that's I know that's an open question, but we always wanted it to be as precise and as a structure that is understood by the public to be the template for the year ahead.
I think I understand you, Mike. I think the answer is yes. Right? I think we've had some questions, probably by Nancy, in regards to positions that might have been.
Well, the real problem we had was when the fire department got reorganized mid-year without coming before us, and we had a problem with that.
Yes, correct.
So if anything like that happens again, we'll have a problem with it again.
Without resolving for just a moment the creation of positions, I think my takeaway from having but had an email from Jeff was that there can be movement within the tables. They got to adhere to the dollars, and that's our job, to hold them to the dollars.
And if you turn to page 45, I think there is a new position within the senior center, which is senior clerk. And I did go through this entire budget, and I agree with you, there was some movement within a given department that might be represent promotions. But in this particular case, under senior center, senior clerk is something that did not exist in the current budget, and they're creating it as a full-time position. I think it was someone who had been working, Mike, is this true, as a part-time
Right.
position?
That's in my
Yes.
notes, that was a part-time, or they moved
But
to
again,
full-time.
it's
yeah.
creating a new position, so.
Right.
And Mr. Monaco's position, I believe, is also new.
Right, and it's good because it's properly noted to us in the budget. It's delineated, so,
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
but, if the statement is made that we don't have any new positions, that's a new position.
Okay, I've exhausted my comments for now. You have to go up with the members. We sort of generally go by seniority.
again,
Mr. Frieda, would you like to make any comments? Or defer to everyone else. Michael?
yeah. As everyone here knows, this budgeting process this year is proving to be frustrating. But municipal governance and town administration, it kind of encompasses multiple responsibilities, including the education of the children, the upkeep of the community, and even recreational and cultural elements that produce our quality of life. So we're faced with certain factors, this board is faced with certain factors that are beyond our control. The collective bargaining agreements are etched in stone. We certainly need labor to operate, and that cost will continue to escalate every year by a rate of around 2.5%. And 2.5% of a figure over $100 million is still a big number, although that's not all labor. External sources of funding have been mentioned here by Mr. Doheny and Mr. Frieda. In the upcoming cycle, just to repeat, we need to overcome the loss of ARPA and ESSER funding. So even before we talk about higher costs, we have less money coming in to make up, to pay for those expenses that have already been budgeted in the current year, let alone the higher rate that might be in next year's budget. And that loss of revenue is $1,987,000, just of those two sources. So that is 0.75 of a mil, if you were converting that to our tax rate. About half of the $59 million non-education town budget is labor-related. And because contractually driven, that increase is around 2.5% per year. that adds up to another $1.475 million of dollars we have to find, which is another $500,000 in taxes. So right now, the proposed budget has a 2.1 mil rate increase. I know that's quite different than what's occurred in the last few years here. But those two factors of less revenue and higher contractual obligations show that these issues are beyond the control of this board. And those two issues, 0.75 mil rate increase, 1/2 of a mil increase, that's 60% of the increase that's in this proposed budget. 60% of that 2.1 mil increase is just those two factors alone.
So that's the 2/10.
And that doesn't even include the money, the extra money we have to put into the pension fund to keep that strong. So it's very frustrating. So given these obstacles, this board does the best it can to mitigate the uncontrollable. And that's all I have to say at this moment.
Diane, if you don't mind, before we go on to you, I did fail to mention that the current Director of Administration has done a great job at settling a number of union contracts for the town. Historically, I'm not sure if this happens in a lot of towns, I suspect it does, that a lot of the contracts have lagged for a long, long time. So he has settled a number of the contracts. I think there's only one union that has an open contract this moment. However, settling all those contracts, especially when they've been open for more than 1 year, tends to have an adverse effect on the budget. Because you've got multiple years of raises that go into the salary line, and there can be some other things that that affect the budget. Mike would probably answer this better, but uniform allowance might go up, for instance, you know. So I did fail to mention that, and I apologize, Mike.
Yeah, that's a big factor that will have to be delineated to the public in all the presentations.
Thanks, Mike.
I think, Michael, you summarized it very well, what the predicaments are this year. I made a statement, ladies and gentlemen, at the State of the Town address, and I think some people here were there, that although inflation raged at an 8.7% rate, we weren't the recipient of an 8.7% inflation rate, but we were at least 3%. And when you look at 3% on a $114 million budget, that's 3%. That's over $3 million right there, in addition to some of the revenue figures that Michael was referring to. Now, to this board's credit, they came in with some decrements. We'll go through that in terms of maybe what we could do. And I may have some good news. I'll let you tee me up on it, Tim, when you're ready, regarding health insurance. So I think we should proceed with going through some of the recommendations here.
I wasn't going to go through all the capital items, Mike, in detail. Unless the members feel compelled, I was going to actually go to Diane and then Nancy and then Nick and see what comments I had.
Diane?
So, this is a tough year, and if you've watched us month to month, you'll see that we've been questioning certain line items, expenses like office supplies, medical supplies. There's a lot of increases because things cost more. We're all experiencing it in personal life as well. So, what this town in the past we've seen is they expect services. Services meaning Board of Ed, educating the children, fire and police, keeping the town safe, and medical responses. So the struggle we have in order to keep all of this up with the spending and the increased costs that we're all facing, not just towns, personally, we're all facing it, is going to be a challenge. And there's a lot of that in this budget, and this is going to be a challenge. And whatever we send to you guys, you are going to be the voice of what you want to see. And it's been a long time since we've had to do something like this. And we did, it was a while back, we were cutting we cut the leaf pickup. I think that's what it was, right, Mike? It was the leaf pickup, right? So that was one of the things that got cut, and one of the times it didn't pass. And then Mike got inundated with calls, and we had to bring it back, or it was brought back, and so there's an example. So I agree with what Mike said. I'm just giving it a different twist on it, that we've been asking the same questions. Office supply, any supplies, building maintenance and repair, right, Nancy? You and I have been asking about the same things, and this is definitely going to be a challenge.
I would point out, I asked for the mill rates for the town they go back to '07, but the mill rate currently is 30.71. That mill rate hasn't changed in 5 years, and in reality, it hasn't changed since 2015 when the mill rate was 30.53. There was a couple ups or downs during that period, but really, the mill rate in this town hasn't gone up since 2015.
Chime in.
Yeah.
So the other day, someone called the office and spoke with Valerie, and during the discussion, the resident said, with all these businesses Mike is bringing in, we should be able to buy more and just keep doing more and more. So let me share with you what all those businesses brought in. So we had a grand list growth, I'll talk net incremental revenue, $1,363,000. That represents development across the town, including the major project I was working on for 225 apartments on Washington Avenue. That now, in these times, is considered development and economic development. But at $1,363,000, we can't bring enough in to offset the loss of revenue plus the escalation factor of inflation. A specific example of inflation, another example, is there's a bridge in town that washed out twice in major rainstorms. It's a public safety hazard. We repaired the bridge. Now the cost of that bridge has gone up from $175,000 to $1.2 million. And I'm being asked if we could appropriate the money to fix that bridge, because in the next 12 months it could collapse again. Where are we going to get that money? So we're applying for grants. There's a match. We might be able to marginalize the $1.2 million by getting a state grant, which we think we can get, but still, our portion of that will be $600,000. That's an example of what we're talking about here.
Diane, did you finish your comments?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty.
All right. Nancy, why don't you go ahead, but if you don't mind, before you do, I know you sent the board some cuts, and I'm sure you're going to want to go over some of those.
Well, I have some introductory comments.
No, I know you do. I just want to say something first, that's all.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm just going to ask that when you do get to your spreadsheet, if you wouldn't sort of work backwards and start with the big dollars and work your way down, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So I'd just like to say, first of all, thank you to the chairman for providing an overview of not only the budget, but also the revenue sources, and Mr. Frieda for providing some updates on some of our important sources of revenue. I do think that I've read about the potential for ECS potentially increasing even more in the newspaper. But I'd like to provide a context as well as my recommendations for some changes. But as I said, I'd like to first thank both the chair for his bipartisan leadership. This year, he has specifically requested input from all members of the Board of Finance, and I think that that's something that I personally really appreciate, and I think that goes a long way towards building a really unified team here. As the chair mentioned, the first version of the budget, including the fully loaded, Mike, is this an accurate description? The wish list from every single department that is ultimately presented at the workshops. as Tim mentioned, that resulted in a total budget of $124.6 million, which is an increase of $8.6 million or 7.4% over the current budget, which is $116 million. One thing that I'd like to point out is that if we proceeded with that very first version of the budget, because there are lots of people asking, why do you need to cut it at all? If we proceeded with that first version of the budget, given our revenue sources, which some are actually lower this year than last year, the mill rate would have jumped from 30.71 all the way up to 33.62. So that's a 2.91 mils jump. And for the average homeowner, let's say you have a home that's that is valued at $300,000, that would represent about an $873 increase in your taxes for a given year. So I think that that's something to bear in mind. And so as everyone has mentioned, we are at this crossroads where we're dealing with inflation as well as revenue from federal and state funding that has been depleted. But our working class community still cannot bear the financial burden of a very large tax increase. So I think we have to balance all of these different factors and ultimately be able to present a budget with what we consider to be a reasonable mill rate. Another thing that I'd like to point out is in our budget on page 39, they do lump together town, capital, and contingency as one number, which is referred to as town, and then a separate number for BOE. I'd like to tease that out for illustrative purposes. So in terms of the increase in the first version of the budget, that is going from 116 up to the 124.6, that particular $8.6 million increase, the relative contributions from the four parts of the budget are town, 47%, BOE, 20%, capital was about 32.4%, and contingency didn't change. So I'm going to consider that to be a zero change or zero contribution. The second version of the budget that we're dealing with this evening, and we refer to that as the March 15th version, reflects the list of declinations that were generated during the Republican caucus with some input from the Democrats. And this budget total is $121.9 million. And that's a reduction of $2.7 million, or 2.1%, from the first version of the budget. And again, if we went forward with this, this would represent a mill rate of 32.79 mils, which is a 2.08 mils increase over the current mill rate, or again, about $624 for the average household.
Nancy, if I could, I got an email from Gary. The average assessed home in North Haven is $210.
Is that assessed or appraised?
Well, we only use the assessment.
No,
The appraisal doesn't matter.
So Nancy, the 300,000 you mentioned is the gross value.
Gross value,
Yeah.
and then you take
Right.
70%
Right.
of that.
Yeah.
So at this budget right here, it's about a $350 to $380 increase per household based on that, roughly.
Mhm.
So the 300,000 is really 210.
Again, this will vary
Yeah, that's fine.
tremendously in our town. There are some houses that are $150,000,
Oh, of course. No, I-
and some
yeah,
that
of
are
course.
well over $1
Right.
million. But again, the reason that I gave you that relative contribution from the four parts of the budget to the increase to the very first version of the budget is that one would assume that the same proportions that led to the increase to the budget would be the guide for the reductions. And in fact, going from the first version of the budget to the second version of the budget, the town, meaning just the town's operating budget, actually only shared a 0.15% decrease. The BOE about 9.4%, and capital was the lion's share of the reductions at 90.5%. So I think it is very important to make these distinctions because it's my recommendation that we continue to make cuts to the budget, focusing primarily on reducing the town operating budget. The town side of the budget, exclusive of capital and contingency, has had a very, a wildly varied percentage increase over the last 10 years, but if you just look at the last 4 years, it's been 6.6%, 4.4%, 4.1%, 5.9%. So the starting point currently on the town side of the budget is a 7.4% increase, and I think that that's a little bit too high. So before we delve into the expenditure line items, I'd like to make a request that ultimately we do go through the declinations, because I would love to be able to know which were cuts and which are capital expenditures that are paid for using ARPA funds. But first, I'd like to just ask a couple of questions of my colleagues here. And I think I know the answer. Is anyone comfortable going to the public hearing with a 2.08 million increase? Or is everyone in agreement that we feel as though we should reduce this?
I'd like to make a couple of comments.
Sure.
So first off, I think that, the whole town knows that we're faced with a really tough environment. The three major buckets, grant reductions, inflation, and contractual obligations such as union contracts have kind of put us in this position. We've also enjoyed, 5 to 7 years of virtually zero tax increases, which I don't know a town in our state that has been managed in that manner. So lots of gratitude for the way that this town has been managed. I think that when we're faced with a 3 mil increase, we're looking at discretionary versus non-discretionary spend items. And what are you going to cut first? It's going to be those discretionary items such as capital. From sitting, this is my first year involved in the Board of Finance, and sitting through the discussions, it's clear that all the leaders of each department were very thoughtful, very conscious of the position that we're in, and it didn't seem like any of the increases were radical or exorbitant. And I think that inflation is a big topic here, and we can't undermine its impact. It's impacted our pockets. It's impacted our daily lives, and I think that while no one's going to like going forward with a 2%, a 2 mil increase, I should say, I think that rather than nickel and diming de minimis budget amounts, I think we need to put it in the citizens of this town's hands. Let them make the decision for where we land, and that if we need to make tough decisions, we have to make tough decisions as a town. But I don't think there's any department where we would want to start determining what they reduce at this point. And I think we've taken out most of what is the low-hanging fruit that I would consider discretionary items.
Thank you, Nick. Did other members want to respond to Nancy's comment or question? Maybe Mike does, I don't know.
So, Nancy, to answer your question,
Mm-hmm.
out of everybody in this room, there's only one person on the hot seat, and that's me, because I present the budget. And I'm prepared to go to the citizens, whatever we decide tonight, I'm prepared to go to the citizens and present this budget. And I will do it in such a personal way to our citizens, because they know me well enough by now to know, to say, ladies and gentlemen, these are the problems we're faced with. The future is going to be this, but right now, I'm going to rely on you to tell me what you'd like to do. I'm prepared to do that, because I have to present the budget, nobody else here.
But we have to decide on the budget.
We have to decide, but whatever it ends up to be, if it ended up to be 2.08, which I think it's going to get less tonight, if it ended up to be that, I'm prepared to go to the public and try to rationalize it and talk about police, fire, education, services. We talked about leaf collection earlier. That service has gone through the roof in terms of cost. So in the end, in this form of government, I'm the guy that presents it, and the public tells us what they want to do about it.
I guess, Nancy, just to repeat something Nick already said, we haven't had a tax increase in 7 or 8 years. 2 mills is a sizable number. You might argue we should have had a tax increase last year, the year before, but we didn't. And, you know, listen, $1 million, which isn't going to make or break this budget, was the extra money which probably was mistakenly budgeted in the first place, right? You know, so, I mean, you know, we can talk about some cuts, but I think ultimately, whether it's 2.1, 2, 1, 9, 1, 8, whatever we come up with when this night's over, I think the residents have to decide. If they say no come May, well then, we're going to have to go back to the town with the cooperation of the department heads and get some additional cuts. But that's inevitably, going to involve bodies and services.
I guess the reason that I'm asking this question is that if you look at the list of declinations, it is all capital, basically. The personnel changes, as you say, zero impact on the budget, and the town has basically, the town operating budget has not been altered at all. So I guess I was a little bit perplexed when I got this list of declinations, that it didn't reflect any cuts on the town operating budget, and so I wasn't quite sure whether the members wanted to make any cuts on the town side.
So let me explain, Nancy, that, because you offered the percentages earlier, but when we look at the capital that was cut, it's all on the town side. And by cutting police cars and some of the fire equipment that I noticed has just been cut, these have an adverse effect on the town. So to cut capital and then cut town resources, the sum of 1 plus 1 is more than 2. That can be really devastating on services. Public Works, we can make an argument that there every day that people see Public Works, whether it's trash pickup, sanitation pickup, snow plowing, parks, recreation, fields, they got basically nothing here, wiped out on the capital. So I can make a strong argument that by eliminating capital, we're hurting the town resources, the people. So that's
Are
how I
you
see it.
saying that all of the things listed here are cut,
No, I'm
or
talking
they're
about-
being paid for with ARPA?
No, when we look at Public Works, some
Yeah.
of the things they wanted,
Uh-huh.
that's a fraction of what they asked for if you look at this budget dated March 15th.
Right.
None of that's being funded by ARPA.
So obviously, the 95-gallon pails has been cut, as it has, for several years in a row. But the last 2 items for Public Works, the pickup with the plow and the 3/4 ton with a rack body liftgate, I had suggested that perhaps we could use MRSA waivers to actually pay for those.
We're going to try it.
Okay.
But there's no guarantee, though.
So there's still a potential that they could get those, and they're not necessarily cut. But I would greatly appreciate it if we could go through this list so I have a sense for what's cut versus what's paid for with ARPA, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, I have a bunch of notes here, and we did work with Ingrid and Mr. Monaco, who also worked with the department heads, and Mike. I don't have a specific list for you, Nancy. My understanding is these are all cuts. I don't know that I could name one. I really would have to almost ask Mike or Ingrid that's ARPA related. I'll look at my notes. They're not perfect, but I'll look at them.
I can tell you, looking at this list, none of this is ARPA. These are just firm cuts all the way across the board. None of this is getting transferred to
The
ARPA.
community services senior center buses is definitely, no?
No.
So you're just cutting those?
First of all, we can't get them. I think we're still 2 years out. So what I'm trying to do on this is work with the Greater New Haven Transit District to see if we can replicate that service by using their buses and then just pay a fee. So that's not ARPA. Originally, though, it had intended to be. But
And the fire administrative vehicle, again, I'm just going off of the list that you gave us back in October that says fire administrative support vehicles, $80,000. So I assume that was one last year and one this year.
not ARPA.
And the fire extrication equipment is also listed.
Hopefully you can apply for a grant for that from somewhere. a safer grant or whatever it is.
You know, we have Lynn Sadowski, who I work closely with.
Yeah.
She's scouring the
Yeah.
grant process.
Yeah.
Yes.
She is tireless.
I had a note from Richie which said, we would try and look into the special funds account. I don't know if he meant, I'm assuming he meant next year, for that item, Nancy.
Okay, that,
And again, police cruisers, we have under public safety, police cruisers, $195,000 of ARPA. So again, I wasn't sure whether that's just last year or last year plus this year.
That was last year. Yeah, it was last year.
Okay, so $195,000 was last year, so
Right.
what we're proposing for this year is just purchasing one?
That's right.
I believe
Yes.
so, yes.
Okay, so one, got it. And then the light bar that's two down from that will go with that, just one, for 30,000.
Correct.
And the firearms is just being cut?
If you remember, that was an upgrade to what they have currently. They wanted to get a new model.
Yeah.
That's a cut unless,
Yep, it has.
yes,
Yeah, that was postponed.
right.
Oh, okay.
They
I
postponed
thought
it.
that they were due.
That's what the.
I don't know that they were due, I just
The-
think he
the-
wanted to
The body
upgrade
armor
it.
was due, I recall.
No, I think I remember that the firearms was due as well, but, okay. All right, so as far as you can tell, everything in this list that's capital, Mike, unless you tell me otherwise, is being cut, with the exception of the potential for 2 public works vehicles that might get paid for with waivers.
Yeah, I think that's an accurate summarization. I mean, I'll double check that, but, this is what I do every day, folks. This Board of Finance comes here once a month, I do this every day. So looking at this quick glance here, I don't see anything here that is going to ARPA, but I will double check it. But Nancy, I think this, let's say that I'm mistaken. Anything here that is ARPA is going to be negligible. So, but looking at this, I don't see it.
Okay. And it would be helpful, the sheet that you gave us back in October that gives the breakdown of ARPA, if you could update that, that would be great.
but I think at the same time, you'll always be searching for alternative sources to acquire these items that the department has requested and that the town needs. So, to me, it's helpful that they're coming out of a budget that started out being totally unacceptable to the public, and then now the bottom line becomes more reasonable. Relatively speaking, of course. I believe you still have the floor.
I still have the floor, okay. So I think that was my main concern, was really just to go through the list of declinations and get a sense for which of these were cuts versus which were being paid for with using ARPA funds. And again, this still represents capital requests as opposed to town operating expenditures. So I still think that a 7.4% increase on the town operating budget is still a little bit on the high side, and might be very difficult to
I think that
present
it
convincingly.
is unfortunate this year. If we were able to keep the debt level and we didn't have to continue to pay, now that debt is escalated, as I mentioned, on the middle school, police department, fire departments, if we're able to take that debt out, which we can, that would have dropped this. If we had a more robust market in the stock market, we wouldn't have had the pension ARC increase and required contribution and health insurance.
If you added up the debt service that is related to education, and you compared that to the debt service that includes the fire department renovation, the new police department, as well as the annual paving. How do those two compare?
Well, I'll just give you an overview in terms of the numbers. So the middle school cost us, after the reimbursement, let's say about $49 million. The fire departments cost us, and now they're 10 years old, $9,247,000. And the police department was anywhere from $16 to $18 million. So the largest debt that the town took out was on the new middle school.
And then on the town side, I guess I'm trying to get a sense for the debt on the town
Yeah,
side.
I'd have to check to see what those percentages are,
Versus,
but I think the two drivers are the middle school and the police department this year. Whatever those percentages are, I'd have to go back and analyze the debt and then try to compute that.
and then they have 2 million every year for paving, right?
This year was 2.6.
2.6.
Right,
Pardon me, yes.
yes.
And so that's going to be the cost going forward? I wasn't sure whether that was
I
going to be.
think so. Yeah, at least for this coming year, if we decide to pay, if it's gonna be about 2.6.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you want to go through your spreadsheet, Nancy?
So, sure, I guess I can just ask if there was any reason that the things that I provided in advance were not included in the declination, or did you just want to save it for the meeting?
I guess you wanted to save for the meeting.
Okay. Okay, so then I won't focus on capital, except for one thing that I think I have mentioned before, which is, it seems to me a redundancy, which is recreation. There's a pool maintenance and repair capital request that I believe also reflects a budgeted line item, which is pool equipment and maintenance of $30,000 in the recreation budget.
All right, you gotta slow down. Where are you on your
Sure.
sheet here?
Okay,
The fourth line in capital, at the bottom, fourth line in capital, so it's page 2
then we
on
need
your
copies of
sheet.
this budget.
I have it.
Yes,
Give me just your numbers, Nancy, the way you designated the numbers.
It's 38, right? Number
yes,
38.
It's
yes,
the-
38, exactly. So this is obviously a capital request for recreation, which is the 1, 2, 3, fourth one down. And the point is that this particular capital request seems redundant to me because we already have a line item for recreation called pool maintenance and repair, which is $30,000.
I can
And that's in the
answer to that.
recreation budget.
I can answer to that. So I did
Sure.
went ahead and I did an audit on that line because it was over in last month's expense budget report.
Yeah.
There was $18,000 of maintenance that we reclassed to capital. So if you see this month's expense budget, you'll see that change, which that brought it to
Yes.
90% spent. And it brought the line on recreation, which is on page 16 of your expense budget report, to 93%.
But that's for the current fiscal year, correct?
Because this was for pool equipment.
Yeah.
And the other expenses were specifically for pool maintenance.
Okay, so I'm going to assume that there was some problem in this current fiscal year, and in order to deal with the expense of that problem, it had to be carved out of the budget and put into some sort of capital request. Is that what you're saying?
No,
As
they
opposed
they
to
were
for the
lumping
next
both of the expenses, the equipment.
Uh-huh.
We did have some repairs that we had to make,
Mm-hmm.
but there was pool equipment lumped with, I'm trying to pull my capital here.
So if I could.
With
if I could
maintenance.
just- So I think what you just said was, in the current year, not the item Nancy was talking about,
Right,
we did a reclass, and that line item in the current year is 90% expense.
yes. The maintenance was lumped in with the equipment. So we
Okay.
did an audit on that line, and we reclassed the maintenance to the capital, and we left the equipment. And both lines are basically spent right now. It's just the way they were carrying. It was carrying at 0 last month. But I went to analyze that line. I've been going to different lines.
In the proposed budget, if you turn to page 35, which is Recreation Division of Community Services, you will now see that there are two separate lines, pool chemicals and supplies, and a separate line, pool equipment and maintenance. And my point is that the line item, pool equipment and maintenance, seems redundant compared to an additional capital line for the next fiscal year, not the current fiscal year, but the next fiscal year, because again, I'm not assuming that the same problem we're experiencing in this month will experience again
Right,
next year.
the problems that we're seeing this year is in the pool equipment line, but the maintenance of it every year is in capital, because.
Right, yeah. Now, it's my understanding, based on experience, which
Who has
someone has here, is that the pool used to shut down every summer for a week or two. Is it summer? Or it shuts down at some point.
Yeah.
And a total reconditioning is done, and some major repairs occurred, and that is usually connected with that capital line. So it's not the same as the ongoing maintenance and equipment that occurs throughout the year as the pool operates. It has to do with the once a year shutdown, makeover, and major repair of the pool itself. And I think we've cut that a couple years. We did eliminate it. It was happening every year, and then a couple years that wasn't present. And so to see it back here, I think it's just as important as maintaining any piece of infrastructure we have. So I knew it as something, even though it has the same title, it's a different aspect, a different level of work.
So does the pool maintenance,
It's different from the budget line that's in total recreation on page 16, which is pool equipment. And that has increased this year a lot because of chemicals
right?
and other things that we have to maintain the pool with.
All right, so the chairman has asked that I go through this in descending order, starting with some of the bigger reductions. So I guess on page 22 in the finance department, personnel part-time.
Well, your biggest item is $100,000 in contractual obligations.
Oh, okay, well, I guess I can start with that, yeah. All right, so personnel policy, which is on page 25. I recommend a $100,000 reduction from $300,000 down to $200,000. And again, the fire department, as was mentioned, is the only remaining expired collective bargaining agreement. And reduction in contractual obligations is intended to offset the increase that is already built into the fire department salaries in the proposed budget in anticipation of the negotiated fire department CBA. So we really shouldn't be double counting. Most departments, you have a flat salary for several years until the CBA is renegotiated. And then once it's renegotiated, then you get back pay for all of those years that are covered by the collective bargaining agreement. For some reason, the fire department has been given the opportunity to actually bump up their salaries for full-time firefighters in anticipation of signing this collective bargaining agreement. If that's going to be the case, that's fine, but then we shouldn't also be contributing in this current fiscal year $300,000 to the contractual obligations. Any thoughts?
I guess what I know is that, yes, I believe there is still one contract open. I'm not clear if I'm not clear if the police contract is fully closed out or not, if that's just an agreement. You know, you're correct. This line item is in there to represent the cost of unclosed contracts.
Right. I'm sorry.
Go right
When
ahead.
you're done. Police, it's been settled, but it hasn't been fully closed, and that's why we have left some.
Okay.
additional
So
funds
there's a
there.
couple open items you're saying?
Yes, per their contract,
Okay.
But all the contractual obligations have been paid.
Yes,
right.
each year. So what are people's thoughts about this? Should this be something we say yes to, still thinking about it?
I think it's something to think about, Nancy. You know, I did talk to Richie about it. He was comfortable with the number, but I think it's open for conversation.
I was told that that number represents some other affiliated costs with the unsettled fire contract. And so it is true that the labor line shows the figure there reflects a settled contract, but there are other associated benefits and other line items within the fire department that may add up to a figure as high as $300,000. Because remember, that's a settlement that's 3 years in arrears. So that's 7.5%. That's 3 years worth of
But we
figures.
contribute into it every year,
What?
right?
I don't know if there's a
So each year that it's
dedicated.
affected, it has a contractual obligation line that,
Yeah, I know, but the third year, it's compounded by what hasn't occurred, what never was.
I don't think
yet
there's a
accounted
dedicated
previous
fund for
years.
that, Nancy, if that's what you're saying.
I'm sorry?
I don't think there's a dedicated fund for that, if that's what you're saying. I think the increase comes totally out of the line in the current year's budget.
No. Can anyone else weigh in on this? As I understand it, once the CBA is signed, that all of the back pay comes from contractual obligations. And that is the sum total of over several years in a row, right?
So the back pay comes from contractual obligations.
Yes.
But the new raise goes into the full-time line, and if it's a 3-year back pay that's out of contractual obligations, to Michael's point, it's 7.5% more in salaries.
Yes, so that's the salary line item. That has nothing to do with this item within personnel.
I think what I'm
policy.
saying, Mike, and maybe Ingrid can help us, or maybe she's look into it, I was not of the understanding that when we put this line in the budget, if, let's say it goes unexpended anyway, or just hypothetically, right? I was not under the understanding that we set that money aside somewhere. It gets used and transferred at the end of the year amongst the transfers. And so it was my understanding that if you settle a multi-year contract, like say a 3-year fire contract, that it all comes out of the contractual obligations in that current year's budget. There's no pool of money that may have built up in prior years that we can draw from. That was my understanding. I could be wrong, but that's what I thought.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I'm saying.
Right.
So it comes out of that line.
Right. Comes out of the line.
Yes. it comes out
Right.
of the line.
Right.
So look, the question on the table is, the $100,000 that Nancy has mentioned. I think it's open for discussion. I don't think it's 100,000, but maybe there's somewhere in between.
Okay.
All right, let's take that one under consideration.
Sure. Let's see, the next biggest one is, as I mentioned, on page 22 in the Finance Department, personnel part-time. Again, my position is, since we filled the 2 senior positions, meaning Mr. Monaco as the Director of Procurement and Administration, and Ingrid as the Comptroller, that we should reduce the Finance Department's reliance on part-time help. Now, I certainly understand following Mr. Swimkowski's death, there was an immediate need for not just part-time help, but overtime and, lots of assistance. But I think previously we've spent like $33,000 and $66,000. We're currently at $67,000 year-to-date. So I think that this number could certainly be reduced. I think it's been budgeted at like 114 this year, and I believe could be reduced. It's proposed at $169,975 for 4 personnel on a part-time basis. That seems like a lot to me.
Well, my understanding for number one is they're having trouble hiring full-time down there. But moreover, I don't understand where the cut comes from. We still need the bodies, and so I'm not sure if you cut the part-timers, now we have less staff. You're
I
saying
cannot do
replace them with full-time staff. I'm not sure where the savings is.
I guess I'm saying reduce the number of hours, because it seems like this has got to be a lot of hours of part-time help.
Would you like to comment? I hear you're there. so.
Yeah, I'm there every day. So we
Sure.
have multiple grants that we have gotten that our head bookkeeper, she's keeping track of that. So as we get more grants, there's a lot more paperwork that we have to account for. There has been software upgrades. So there's tremendous amount of work that we have added to our department. We have retirees that we will need to train people to do their jobs. And they are working part-time to train new people that are coming in. And we have just tremendous amount of.
Would you like to talk about the work that has to be done down there in dealing with the retirees on medical insurance and COLA increases and all that, Social Security?
So that, she is actually part-time now, that all this OPEB reports and the actuaries, she's part-time. She is actually training our current payroll, and then she will be retiring. So there's a lot of training. We also did not have succession plans. When somebody retired, nobody would be able to take their work, so we are creating a lot of that.
Yeah, and I believe you're at least one full body behind. You're missing someone who you definitely
Yes.
you desperately need.
We just lost our senior clerk too. We don't have
Yeah,
a
so
senior clerk.
that's why that line is under expended at the moment in our expense report, because the positions are not fully filled.
Right. Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to understand what is new. We've had grants for years, we've had software upgrades for years. I think that certainly we're all missing Mr. Swinkowski, who I think did the job of, at least 4 people. But I guess I'm just trying to understand how, now that we've filled these 2 senior positions, I would think that, more hands make light work, and that hasn't been the case. It's just more hands.
Well, look, my understanding is we've had some retirements.
Uh-huh.
We've been fortunate that some of those retirees have come back to work part-time for the town. And although we have more hands in the form of Mr. Monaco, having spoken to him, he's not there per se doing the regular day-to-day work. He obviously had a big hand in putting this budget together. But he's working on a lot of other things that, for years, probably needed some attention by the town. I mean, if you go back in time, there always was 2 senior people in the finance department. But we got away for years with just one. And Richie does more than just, the accounting end, as I think we all know.
Okay.
Let's go on to the next one.
And I think you mentioned before, the police chief's request for the 9th full-time dispatcher. I don't think that ever made it into the budget. He kind of presented it at the workshop, but it wasn't really in the initial budget. And so we're just going to scratch that, correct?
Correct.
Okay, just want to make sure.
You got $50,000 for the part-time fire
50,000,
inspector.
sure. So I think that the fire department has gone through a pretty big turnover in the last year, where both of the deputy chiefs have gone on to other positions, as well as the fire inspector. And so the fire chief had to hire a new deputy chief of operations, as well as, most recently, a new deputy chief who will be the deputy fire marshal and replace the fire inspector. But now all of those positions have been filled. So I feel as though that is the full complement of a fire marshal department, if you also include, the secretary. And so between the chief, who is the fire marshal, the deputy fire marshal, and a full-time, what used to be called a consultant is now called a fire inspector, I would think that that would be sufficient in order to actually do both the standard fire inspections of existing facilities as well as the planned reviews of renovated or new facilities. And again, the chief presented this as a cost-neutral addition, and then later, I believe he changed that and acknowledged that, of course, it's an expense to add an additional part-time person, and that the pie, if you will, of revenue that would come from the plan review is a fixed pie. It's not that if we hire more people, we can bring in more revenue. It really is just a question of dispersing more work across, more people. And so my feeling is that I don't exactly understand why this is necessary. And so that's why I had suggested reducing this particular line item by $50,000.
I was there as you were for the presentation. And unfortunately, I can't recall what he said word for word, but my recollection was he's got a big backlog of work. And while he is a certified fire marshal, I think what he said was, he's got a wide range of duties, and while he does do some inspections, I think that, he had too much to do, I think, to be doing these inspections. I did see this cut that you suggested, Nancy, and my reaction was, I would be personally reluctant to cut it without having some further conversation with the chief as to just how desperately he needs this position. I mean, this is this is one of those areas that, could directly affect the health and welfare of the residents of the town. I think Paul has to manage his department, obviously, to dollars and to safety, because that's obviously what his role is. But I would be a little reticent to move this item without input from the chief.
Anyone else have any thoughts about this?
I think it's a fair comment, Nancy. I mean, I don't think we have enough background to make that call right here, as our chairman said. So let's just take it under advisement.
I work with Paul every day. I see what he goes through. I know his other responsibilities. He's become a leader in the region with all the other fire chiefs on the 911 emergency dispatch system. So, I'd be reluctant to take this out.
Well, I know that I did ask him during the workshop if this position has already been filled, and he said no at the time. Is that still the case?
So say again.
I'm not sure how could he fill the position that he's requesting?
Well, I asked that only because I happened to see a picture of someone in our local newspaper that is being presented as someone who was a former firefighter who's retired, who has now been listed as a fire inspector. So that's why I'm wondering if...
Oh, it's David O'Bear, Nancy's talking about David O'Bear.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So he's already working in this capacity?
yes, part-time.
Part-time.
Yes.
Okay. So that's another position that's been created without benefit of a budget referendum. Okay, so I guess taking under advisement. Let's see, what else do we want to do? Building maintenance, repair, and supplies for the police department. Again, I think that this is something that was very perplexing when the police chief presented this. He said that $30,000 was added onto this particular line item for munis changes in police payroll. Does
He did.
that sound familiar?
Yes.
Well, Ingrid could probably explain this better than I could. I do remember the conversation, but let Ingrid.
Yes,
Please do.
so we are going through major updates. Munis have not been updated in 10 years to the point that we were not getting support at all from anything that was happening in our software. This has to happen in payroll system. We are manually doing a lot of work. They have to spend hours and hours filling out papers and inputting them in the computer, and per state mandate, they had asked us that our payroll system needs to be updated. So this is only for the police department. That would be this updated. Other departments, we're working with them in updating one by one.
So they still gonna fill out paper, or are they gonna?
No, it will be everything electronically, yes,
Electronically,
right.
like-
Yes, they're spending
Like
a
ours.
lot, yes.
So
Same
is
thing
this
with,
increase different from the, I'm sorry to interrupt, but IT already reflects a munis increase from
Right.
40 to 80,000?
that was the financial upgrade that we did this year.
Yeah.
From 10 years of not being upgraded. We were in a very, very old version of Munis, which this would, now with all the implementation that, yes,
Sorry, I didn't mean.
Sure.
So it sounds like the second item was an upgrade, normal upgrade like any, whereas the police is an enhancement where we're getting electronic
for
ti-
payroll
payroll as
purposes.
opposed to filling out papers. What, that's my.
Yes,
layman's
which
way
every
of it.
department will need to get upgraded.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to keep that in that particular line item, building maintenance, repair, and supplies? Because I thought there was some discussion of, put it somewhere. but
Maybe it
that's-
doesn't belong there, but the
seems
dollars are
weird
gonna be
to
there no
put
matter
there.
what.
Yeah.
You got the volunteer association's 28,000.
Okay.
That was your cut,
Yeah,
sorry.
Yes, Volunteer Association. Again, this is for the fire department, once again. I'd like to reduce this from 33,000 down to 5,000. And this is simply their contributions towards joining various volunteer associations. This is not actually in any way paying for any costs associated with our fire volunteers.
I think these are expenses, right, that he budgets for certain expenses, reimbursable type expenses, right?
Yes,
It seems a little high to me, Nancy, I'll give you that.
Again, previously, we spent 500 and at most 2,500. So, and this year, year-to-date, 0. So to be budgeting $33,000 seems,
Yeah,
yeah,
I think there's some room there for movement.
okay.
But just to add a note,
Go
we are
ahead.
currently doing an audit on that line because it was 0, but that's not the real number year-to-date. They were in other lines. Yes, they were a misclass, yes.
Right.
But then again, yes, it's not that high.
okay,
I can
well-
give you an update.
Okay.
That would be very helpful, thank you. Okay, I guess we're down to the 15,000, here we go. Telephone services, under central supply on page 24, reduced from 330,000 to 315. Again, some insight about this would be helpful. Previously, we spent 273,000 and 308,000. Thus far this year, we've spent 152,000. So I don't really have a sense, is the cost here dictated by a contract? Is there some overages that come towards the end of the year? It's not entirely clear how we get up to this enormous number.
There was, Richie said there was some damaged equipment. Ingrid, does that make sense?
I'll have to
That ring a
look
bell?
into this when I,
But I think we can work with that.
Okay.
The 15,000.
Sure.
Which one is that, telephone services?
I think we can accommodate that.
Nancy, if you don't mind, you had 20,000 unemployment.
Unemployment. Again, this is something that I noticed in the current budget reports. I'd like to reduce this from 30,000 down to 10,000. I think thankfully, we have not had to be paying much in unemployment compensation.
The problem there with that is that we have to pay that ourselves. It's not unemployment you pay to the state,
Right.
that a company does, right? So this is unemployment that we have to pay directly.
Right.
So rather than, and I don't really know how unemployment works, maybe Ingrid can tell me, but I assume that when you pay unemployment, you pay a more predictable tax or levy, as opposed to this, it's direct pay. So it's got to be one of those lines that's more difficult to budget, because it could go up and down, based obviously on the unemployment levels the town has.
Right. And I guess that's where Mr. Frieda could probably provide some insight. I think when we were in the midst of the pandemic, I think that there were some issues in which we saw a pretty substantial spike in this particular line item, but this year we really have been very fortunate. And I agree with you, we should not drain this down to 0, but I think going from 30 down to 10,000 might make sense. So that's a possibility.
I think it's a possibility, I'm just reluctant to commit to 10.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yes.
think maybe there's somewhere in between there.
It's more of a safety measure?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So reduce it from 30 down to 20, and that's a savings of 10? How's that?
You know, I'm good with that. I mean,
Okay.
if it ends up next year over 30, over
Yep.
20, we're gonna have to pay it anyway.
Yep.
We report it to the town meeting if it's over $20,000, so I'm fine with that.
Sure. Let's see, any other tens? So the condo trash pickup, again, I'm sure there's all kinds of subtleties associated with this, but again, just based upon the numbers, the historical numbers, 92,000, 91,000, we've spent 108 this year. It still represents a $20,000 increase if we reduce it down to 115, but it saves us $10,000.
That's a wild card line.
Yeah.
We all know the trash pickup is going to go up and up and up.
Yeah, so, yeah, I would say, Nancy, that's one that I would be uncomfortable with.
Okay.
Because the occupancy rates are rising,
Mhm.
and the tip fees are rising also.
Okay.
So, just so, what did we decide on the unemployment
Oh.
compensation?
We thought we might be able to get 10 out of that, right? Or we're suggesting.
Unemployment, reduce it from 30 to 20, for a
Yes.
savings of 10.
Okay, very
Okay.
good.
Let's see, okay, so the condo trash pickup, you said no. Transportation and hauling, again, reducing that from 120 down to 110. Obviously, we can't anticipate Mother Nature, but previously, 109,000, have spent 54,000 this year. We budgeted 170, and I believe that was a remnant from the hurricane and tornado debris hauling costs from 2020 and 2021. So I'm recommending reduce that from 120 to 110 for a savings of $10,000.
We can live with that. It's again, it's a, we don't know what the storms are gonna be.
Nope, absolutely not.
So, but $10,000, if it goes over that, I go back to what I just said earlier, we go to the town meeting, we say there would be storms, we report it that way.
Right.
I'm good with the $10,000.
Okay, and eventually, we did receive some FEMA funding, but it didn't help us in a given fiscal year. I completely acknowledge that. And, okay, let's,
You got a couple more at 10, Nancy. I think that's probably as low as we probably should go.
okay. I think I have, for the finance office, and I think maybe you can chime in on this, Diane's favorite category of office supplies. Reduced from 25,000 down to 15,000 for savings of 10. Previously spent 4,000, 11,000, have spent 5,600 year to date, and you know this would still represent a $7,000 increase over the current budget of 8,000.
Ingrid, this is in finance.
Yes.
Yes.
We are going to be moving next door, so we will need the additional funds for that.
So office supplies is paying for the move.
No, office supplies will be paying for our furniture and things that we will need to be able to move.
Oh, okay. I didn't understand that that includes furniture. Okay. Okay. Let's see.
You had another one.
Other medical supplies.
Yes.
Again, I think I asked about this during our meeting. I recommending reducing this from 69 to 59. Previously, we spent 54, 49,000. We've spent 52 year to date, and I just had a question about whether we were helping Nelcon with this or not. So,
Richie says we're currently at 65, tracking to 75.
But
Okay.
coming back to what you just mentioned, Nancy, we answered that about Nelcon.
yep,
so-
absolutely. Yeah, no, you did, for sure. Oh, and I think there was one question for technology for the fire department that I think is 15,000. Line 28. I'm recommending reducing that from 47,500 to 32,500 for savings of 15,000. Previously, we spent 24,000, 16,000. We've spent about 29,000 to date. And again, my reduction still represents a $5,000 increase over the current budget of 27,500.
I don't really know what this item
I don't
is.
really know if he has like a line item.
What is this for?
What is this is technology for the fire department.
Right, but like, for what specific?
Great question.
That would be my question. Is it something something that they use at the fire station that tracks something? Is it that, I would want to know what that is.
Yeah,
can look into it.
again, I'm just going based upon the.
Yeah, I would want to know what the
previous
technology is on
Sure,
that, for
that would be
sure.
helpful.
Okay,
Okay.
all right. So we got a couple things to think about. I think what I'd like to do is, in a moment, not this exact moment, ask for a short recess. But Mike, do you have any kind of update on the medical?
Yes, so, I work closely with the agents on the town side, and we have some good news on this. And the way it works is that there's a 13-month look back on claims history. So the last 2 months, we've been able to knock off high months looking back. So the agents have told me that the $7,600,000 that we have in this budget, we might be able to look at about $350,000 to take off of that, because the claims history had dropped. We drop off the higher months. So,
Did you want to give it one more month and decide on this in April?
Well, here's,
yeah,
I didn't mean to interrupt you, Mike, I'm sorry. Here's my thought on that. Yes, we could, but it could go either way. So
Right.
my suggestion is, since we've got the cut now, we put it in, right?
And then add it back if we,
Well, I always thought you were thinking the other way, Mike. I thought you were thinking that we might go down again, sorry.
no, I just wanted to know if this amount of reduction is the correct suggestion, that's all.
at this moment in time, it is. Now, keep in mind the logistics on this, folks. Tonight is the night that the Board of Finance is going to put together a resolution, and I go before the public, before the next Board of Finance meeting.
Okay,
So, we have an opportunity to take off $350,000,
okay,
and then we see, what happens at the public meeting.
good.
And then we still have the April Board of Finance meeting to make any adjustments, whether it's up or down. Right, Tim?
Well, that's what I was thinking. Mike, obviously, I think was thinking the optics of
Yeah.
it, that, it's better to go down than up, right? I think that's what Mike was thinking,
Right.
but.
So the question is, do we take advantage of this now, Michael, the 350? Or are you suggesting we wait until April?
I guess we should put our best foot forward at this time and get this budget as close to what we believe it'll be in April anyway. So certainly, yes, we can make this reduction now, and this will, I think, take us below 2 mils.
Yeah.
Certainly this, plus some of the reductions that Nancy has proposed here. So, yeah, that combination will definitely be a step in the right direction.
I want to consider rolling up, Tim, what we just discussed and see where we're at.
Yeah, while we recess, we can
That's what I was
get this all together
Right.
into a motion.
Right.
Okay.
So, I'm not sure, actually, I forget if we need a motion for this, but I'd like to make a motion that we have a 15-minute recess to reconvene at 8:45. Take a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, reconvene at 8:45. All right, thank you, everyone. Appreciate the pause.
Yes.
I'm just going to restate, I think, the conversations that we just had and try and sum all this up for everyone in the room and the members. But in addition to the decrements that were already presented in this evening's package, we are proposing the following reductions. Medical, $350,000. Contingent obligations, $50,000. Fire Department, the Volunteer Associations, $20,000. Unemployment comp, $10,000. Transportation and hauling, $10,000. For a total of $440,000 in cuts. Ingrid and I have been doing the math. That would bring the town side to $59,856,429. Ingrid, I did not do the total yet. I'm not sure if you've got a total for us over there.
Yes, adding the Board of Education, which is $61,643,954, that totals to $121,500,383.
500 what?
500,000,
383.
383.
Can we just round it to an even 500,000? Only joke.
$121,500,383. Okay, I got the same number. All right.
And what's the mill rate associated with that?
Oh, sorry. That's about a, I have that.
0.14.
It's a .14 reduction. It'll get us to, sorry, about 1.94, Nancy.
So a total of, is it 3265 or 32?
I mean, I'm probably off a hundredth or so. I kind of rounded a little bit, which we don't have to do for this book, but it will get us to .14 less than what's in this book. Oh, we had a new page, didn't we? Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Does anybody have the new page to make it
Yep.
easy on us?
So 3265?
What's on the new page, Nancy?
3279. And you said it was .14 less?
Yeah.
So that's what I calculated to, 3265.
Yep, that's it.
Okay. All right. Unless there's any further conversation then from the members?
Do we make a motion to
Yeah, well,
accept these cuts? Or no?
um,
We-
I don't know we have to. I think we have to pass. I think we just make the resolution on the total, on the Board of Ed, the town total, Mike. That's my recollection.
Right, okay, because we certainly didn't make a motion on the original decrement, or the original change list, so.
Well, the original change list was reflected in the budget you got.
Right, yeah. Okay.
I mean, if you think we should make a motion on the cuts, happy to do that. Want to button things up?
No, I guess that the final number will just
Yeah, I think the final number comes out in the right. Okay.
So,
So why don't I read the resolution, and I'll take a motion on that. So resolved that the Board of Finance recommends to the public hearing a fiscal year 2023 to 2024 town government budget of $59,856,429. I think we'll do these separately if you don't mind. Can I hear a,
you want to second that, Nance?
Yes.
Or you made the motion?
I made the motion, yes. All right, Nancy, second?
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 My second motion is a resolution that the Board of Finance recommends to the public hearing a fiscal year 2023-2024 Board of Education budget of $61,643,954. I'd like a second, please.
Second.
Second, could I discuss?
You can, please go ahead.
Yeah. So, it's the elephant in the room here. That's why we're over capacity tonight. The $250,000 proposed reduction it's somewhat of a symbolic cut in the Board of Ed. Myself, like everyone on the board, I believe I can speak on behalf of everyone on the board, want a well-funded school system. Why would we present and tolerate a $250,000 reduction in the Board of Ed budget? And simply put, we know in the end what is acceptable or not acceptable to the public, the voting public that has voted in North Haven for the last 30 years. Now, we look at it in a very aggregate sense. A 2.1 mil or a 1.9 mil increase is not going to be well accepted by the public, but if we didn't include some undesirable costs, some costs that show that we're making sacrifices, including sacrifices with regard to the education budget, we think there's a greater chance it will fail. So we have to make some tough decisions. If it goes down, if the budget doesn't pass, then new and larger cuts will be made to many departments, including the Board of Ed. That's just the history of how it's happened. Now, it's not a threat, it's not a promise I'm making, whatever. That's, again, it's based on experience, it's based on history. So to avoid the budget failing and to avoid larger cuts that will be horrific, maybe, we have to at least show to the public that we're willing to do difficult things. And, so in this case, this cut is 0.4 of 1%. So here we don't see the glass as 0.4% empty. We see the education glass as 99.6% full. So that's all I can say on this. Mr. Frieda, you may or may not agree with this perspective.
No, I see your point, but I'm going to make a bold statement here, that if the budget doesn't pass, I'm not going to be supporting any additional cuts on the Board of Ed.
Very good.
So,
Very good.
If I could just add a little bit to what Mr. Hallahan was saying, again, in terms of context, the $250,000 cut to the increase in the Board of Education budget represents 0.4% of the total budget, meaning $61.9 million. It represents 14.7% of the requested increase of $1.7 million. Now, again, in terms of historical context, the BOE has recorded substantial surpluses during the past 3 years. $850,000, $1,700,000, and as I mentioned before, given the fact that they're requesting $385,000 in capital expenditures for next year, I think there's an expectation of a surplus again this year. And most importantly, the BOE budget has been approved with no cuts made for the past 2 years, and 3 years ago, there was only a $200,000 cut to the increase. And so I consider that to be an interesting and important track record to emphasize that this board actually is very pro-education, and I myself have certainly advocated for education for many, many years. And I think given the much larger reductions in capital, I don't think that we necessarily need to be making any cuts to the BOE budget this evening. However, I will reserve any future predictions based upon the public hearing and the type of feedback that we get from our community, because I think that's ultimately what will dictate what this board does at our April Board of Finance meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, and the last point I'll make is that this $250,000 cut on a $61 million budget, I believe, will have no impact on learning. But I'm not an expert in that field. That's just what I do believe. And I've opposed many cuts in the past, and hope that this is the only reduction that is necessary in this budget cycle.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Nancy. Anything from the other members? If not, I'll call for vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All right. Finally, I'll move the following, excuse me, that a fiscal year 2023-2024 budget recommendation of $121,500,383 be presented to the public hearing to be held on Tuesday, April 4th, 2023, with the Board of Education budget to be presented first, beginning at 7 p.m., followed by the town government to begin no later than 8 p.m., with general discussion to follow as may be warranted. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you.
All right, once again, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for the way you've conducted this meeting and for the accommodations and compromises that you've shown this evening. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. Thanks, everyone. Okay, public comment. Ms. Boehme.
Good evening, Sally Blaine, 5 Blossom Drive. Mr. Chairman, I also would like, having come to almost all of these meetings for the past 10 years, I would like to commend you for the way you ran this very important March Board of Finance meeting and your willingness to listen to all members of the board. That is a very refreshing change. And I commend you for your leadership of this very important board. I just had a question about the revenue budget on page, I'm looking at your Board of Finance 31523 book. On page 7, well, first, I'm very discouraged about that pilot going down 280,000. You know, we finally, for years, it was in the 400, 500,000. Then it creeped up, and we got over $1 million. I was a little discouraged, as I'm sure you were, Mike, that it went down. I'm going to have to talk to Mr. Yacarino or Mr. Ciccarello about that. But my question is about town revenue general, further down on page 7, under town miscellaneous receipts. It is budgeted at $200,000, and you could see that in 21-22 we took in $618, and if you look at your current revenue budget, it is trending over $600,000 again this year. So is there any, maybe there is some specific explanations for why it's doing so strongly, not only last year, but in the current year, and is there possibly any movement perhaps from 200,000 to 400,000 because of this 2-year trend on that revenue line?
So as far as this year, Sally, we got let's say $50,000 unexpected that we hadn't budgeted for on the sales tax issue that I mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So that's this year. We're told, because I've been involved with CCM and costs and with OPM, we're told that don't budget for that this year.
Okay.
Because the likelihood is you're not going to get it. However, much like this past year, we didn't budget for it, we got it. So there could be some upside, but to put it in there may be an artificial increase that we would be struggling against to make if we don't get it.
Right. Well, if it had been over 600,000 just 1 year, I probably would not have suggested it. Not that 2 years in a row over 600,000 is a trend, but it happened twice. So I just wanted to put that out there.
But
Thank
wasn't
you.
the other 600, Mike? Didn't we get some money from the state for storm damage? That wasn't that? Wasn't that the other 600?
So let's go back, because that's a good point. So
Is that where the FEMA went?
Yeah, that's where the FEMA went.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was at 451,000,
Yeah,
Sally.
I think it was.
Okay. And I just wanted to make a few points. One point I wanted to make during your discussion early in the meeting when you were talking about the expenditure line in the fire department for medical supplies already being at 30% over, I do understand that a lot of that would have to do with inflation. But I also remember at the fire department workshop, the chief stating that Nelson responded to 1,100 911 calls and that the fire department resources were not necessary. So if you have the fire department going to a lot less emergency calls, wouldn't that maybe be counterbalanced by inflation? I just wanted to throw that out there for your thought. Next, I wanted to say something about saying that there haven't been any tax increases since 2015. That's a little misleading. We have revals.
Yeah, there was a
every
reval year.
4 years,
There was.
and the last reval, for example, I believe between around 35 to 40% of our taxpayers got a significant increase in their tax obligation because of significant increases in the assessed values of their property. So for those people at home who heard here tonight, taxes haven't gone up since 2015, and your taxes went up, it's because of reval. So I just, the mill rate gets a little fuzzy reval year, but people certainly have had tax increases. So I just wanted to clarify that. Next, regarding the CBA contracts, it is my understanding that the fire department is the only one that's open, and it expired June 30th of 2022. Isn't that correct? Mr. Hallahan mentioned that it would be 3 years in arrears. It will not be.
I don't think that's the information we got, right?
We had a special Board of Selectmen meeting on November 18th of 2019, and we extended
I think you're right.
the term of the fire department CBA to June 30th of 2022. So it's current, and I asked this last month when I saw that the full-time salary increases were already built into the fire department salaries, and because that's unusual to do it before the passing of a CBA. And you said to me, Mike, that we will be passing a new fire department CBA soon. So I just feel very comfortable. I'm saying this because of that contractual obligation line discussion you all had under personnel policy. Ms. Barrett suggested reducing it from 300 to 200. I think you compromised at 250. I'm just saying this so that you will have a greater comfort level
Right.
in that, because the fire department CBA is not 3 years in arrears. That's when you get hit hard with the contractual obligation line in the personnel policy section when there's a lot of arrearage. So I just wanted to clarify that so that you would feel comfortable with your compromise of a $50,000 cut on that line.
You
I
make a
feel
very-
very comfortable with it as well.
You make a very valid point.
Thank you very much. And finally, I want to talk about, well, I have one other thing. I support the $250,000 cut in the Board of Ed budget, and Ms. Barrett, as she often does, stole my thunder because I had the data about last year, no change, the year before, no change, and the year before that, just a $200,000 cut. I think that track record of Board of Education requests versus what they received would be the envy of many boards of education in this area. So I believe that we have, I am certainly happy that this board has been very supportive of Board of Education in the past few years. So, and given the other significant cuts in capital and in the operating budget, I feel even more comfortable with that $250,000 cut in Board of Ed. These are very tough times. Everybody has to kick in. But I do have one other thing to talk about. and you all kind of touched on this a little bit when you were talking about the fire department, fire inspection, fire investigator line. It used to be for years known as consultant. This year it's in your budget as fire inspector. And, I went to the fire commission meeting and I talked to the chief about this line, and I'm supportive of the $50,000 increase. I said that I was at the commission. I was arguing with the chief at the fire commission meeting about whether it was expense neutral, which it is not. And he he very easily acknowledged it's not. No expense is expense neutral. Any expense on the expenditure budget has to be supported in some way on the revenue budget. But, and Mrs. Barrett again alluded to this, I want to read from the chief's workshop statement where it says fire inspection, fire investigator, 50,000. Current funding of 100,000 doesn't allow the fire department to keep up with ongoing fire and life safety inspections, blah, blah, blah. And then he says, and I quote, "This funding will allow an additional part-time fire investigator inspector to work within the fire marshal's office." That's kind of the future tense. So if we get this, we will have this. And so when Mrs. Barrett asked, is this position filled, Mr. Chairman, you said, well, it can't be yet. It hasn't been passed, but it has been filled. And I was shocked when I saw the Citizen and I saw this picture with not only Mr. Siracco, who replaced the longtime consultant, James Etherton, who was first hired in October of 2016. He's gone, and Mr. Siracco replaced him as the full-time consultant, no problem, but there's this new fire inspector. He's already been hired. And this just gets me, because it's just another example of how the fire department does not follow the budgetary rules that everybody else has to follow. Everybody's always says to me, "Sally, why do you pick on the fire department?" I'm not picking on them. They don't follow the budgetary rules. They got 2 firefighters in mid-fiscal year in December of 2018. They promoted 4 lieutenants to captain on December 31st of 2019 and got more money, a clear violation of not only 7-438 of our general statutes, but also a violation of 706 and 707 of our charter. They don't, the thought of another department, like if Public Works just hired a new collector in mid-fiscal year, they would never do that. Public Works comes here year after year begging and scrimping for workers, and finally last year they got a new collector for their sanitation division and a new laborer for streets and roads. They don't hire in mid-fiscal year. They don't break the rules. The fire department, for some reason, can hire in mid-fiscal year whenever they want, and I don't understand it. I don't understand how this person could be hired and already on the books. The line, if you notice from your expenditure report, the consultant line is already at $82,500 through February. Let me just give you the history of this line when it was called a consultant. The first year was 16-17 fiscal year. That's a partial year. He was hired in October. It was $62,000. Then it was $89,000, not budgeted, by the way. It wasn't in the budget. 18-19, $96,000, also not budgeted. 19-20, it was not budgeted, and he got $91,000. I was complaining to Mr. Monaco about how I came to before this board and complained, how can this consultant be paid all this money year after year when he's not budgeted? I never got an answer. I finally went to the town attorney, and lo and behold, the next year it appeared in the budget. And in 2021, that was the first time it was actually budgeted at $100,000, and it lined out at $91,000, $94,000. It's tracked now at $82,000 because now it's paying 2 people, obviously. It's paying not only the full-time guy who replaced Mr. Etherton, but now it's paying this new inspector who was already hired even though this hasn't been approved by referendum yet. And if this line goes over 100,000, I'm not going to be happy about that, because he hasn't, Mr. Chairman, when Ms. Barrett asked, has he already been hired, you said, he can't be, it hasn't been approved yet. How do
Yes, I
you
did.
feel, sir, that he's already been hired?
That was news to me, obviously, Sally. I guess I don't feel great, but truthfully, I'll go back to what I said earlier in the meeting, which is, my understanding is he needs to meet his budget for personnel. Now, I can recheck that with Jeff and ask for the specific example, but that's what's going through my head right now.
Well, again, at the Fire Commission meeting in late February, I stated publicly for the record that I supported the position. I did. I just didn't want it to be called expense neutral. And I do support the position, but I hate it when people break the budgetary rules, and that's what has happened. He was hired without the funding. Why did he come before this board and ask for the funding when he'd already been hired? That's, and that's why I read the exact wording from his report. It said, this will allow us to hire. It doesn't say it will fund what we've already done. And that's what bothers me. I support the position. I want to make that very clear. I support the $50,000. There is a lot of work that fire marshal's office has to do, and I publicly said I supported it. But I don't like when people break budgetary rules, and that's what happened here. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Sally.
I have a technical issue. There's no public comment on the agenda. I was wondering if we could add it.
I saw that, but I assumed it was an oversight, honestly, Tammy.
Okay.
But I make a motion, we amend the agenda to allow for public comment.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Just,
Thank you so much.
State your name and address, please, sir.
My name is Scott Friedman. My address is 17 Cooper Road. I first just want to thank you all for the work that you're doing, the service to the town. This is some very, very deep stuff that we're going through. I'm a parent of an incoming kindergartner. I've been watching the Board of Ed specifically as my daughter is coming into the school there. I really do fully appreciate the explanation for some of the budgetary pressures, the mill rate pressure that you're facing. I also think this is absolutely not the time to reduce the education budget. Specifically, we're dealing with COVID learning gaps, drying up federal and state funding, and I think I actually do want to spend a second on one particular item. You mentioned that ECS, educational cost sharing, which is the amount that the state provides to us for our education, is going up by $313,000. In the same breath, you then took $250,000 away from the proposed budget. That ECS funding is critical to student success. We need that to be going to students. If that is sort of decreasing the amount that we need to cut in other areas, I would ask that you think about the idea of putting some of that funding back. And if that were to go up, which there's a bill pending to potentially further increase that, that we ensure that that funding goes to the Board of Ed.
Scott, excuse me one second.
Sure.
That's a general, it's called ECS, we all know that, right? It's for education, we all know that. It comes in as a general item. It just goes into the general fund of the town to be spent, okay? And just to give an idea, you probably know this, but in the current year, we got about, call it $4 million in ECS funding, which barely covers anywhere near, obviously, a $60 million budget, right? So I understand your point. It's a little bit bigger picture than that, in my opinion.
100%. Yeah, and I do appreciate that explanation. And generally, I appreciate the depth that which you're going into this. I'm going to just leave a few statistics. One of the Board of Ed members, Amanda Gabriel, had done some analysis on the budget, and in comparison to some of the other towns in our district resource group, reference group, which are basically schools with similar backgrounds and town shape. The average year-over-year increase in those districts is 6.5%, and especially with the funding that's drying up from the ESSER grant, I want to make sure that we don't impact the 3 positions that you talked about. And I think that the Board of Ed will figure out a way to do this, but I effectively want to make sure that in the future that we have transparency not from here to the end of the budget solely, but really from the budget workshops to here. And I will ask respectfully that we find a way as a town to publish the initial budgets in an Excel spreadsheet format that can be used by the town to, analyze what is coming to you as a request, and then what you go to the Board of Finance next meeting with. Because personally, I was shocked. I was surprised by having watched the budget workshops and then coming here and already having seen a $250,000 decrease. But for Selectman Frida, I want to thank you for your commitment not to further impact the Board of Ed funding if the budget referendum doesn't pass. And I also want to give you my utmost commitment to helping this budget pass, regardless of where we end up, because I saw what happened in 2015, and the cuts came directly out of Capital and Board of Ed. In this particular set of cuts, Capital got the lion's share of the cuts, but as First Selectman Frida said, a lot of those were things that we couldn't purchase during this year. So I respectfully ask you to think about restoring some of that Board of Ed funding, and also just to increase the transparency between budget workshop and this meeting. But I thank you.
Great, thank you.
Very
Thank
much.
you, Scott.
Anyone else? Sorry, go ahead.
So we get this open. My name is Kieran Ahern. I live at 23 George Street. I want to thank you guys all for the work you've done tonight. This is the first board meeting I've attended, and I've learned a lot about just how the town functions in this one meeting. So I think it's been very well done, and I thank you all for that. I also want to thank you, Selectman Frida, for committing to not doing any potential budget cuts to the Board of Education. That's primarily what I want to talk about tonight. You mentioned earlier that the inflation rate has been about 8.9%, but the town is only seeing about 3.5%. Just one thing I'd like to point out to the board. I think the proposed increase was only about a 2.9% for the Board of Education, their year-over-year increase. With the $250,000 cut, it's down to about 2.4%. So essentially what we're seeing is, in real dollars between last year and this year, about 1% decrease in actual dollars. So that was all I had to say, so thank you all.
Great, thank you, sir.
Yeah, and I think that everyone on this board thought that Superintendent Stirk's presentation was extremely thought-provoking, and that the budget he presented was lean and reasonable. And so we do agree that there's not much to cut there, because his budget was extremely responsible in the way it was explained to us, and the way he appears to have allocated his dollars.
Thank you, Mike. All right, not seeing anyone else motion to hit the podium, I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everybody.
The preceding program is brought to you in part through a grant from the town of North Haven. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at nhtv.com.